positive mental health for me is a calmness, a state of mind, and just being calm within yourself and not troubled, so the mind can be still.
If your entire life you've grown up in a society where you've been told you're inferior, that your way of life is backward, that your language and your history is absolutely nothing, it doesn't exist, it's made up, that in itself eats away at you and it feeds into you.
The All-Ireland Traveller Health Study was completed in 2010, and at that time the statistics coming out off the back of that were that travelling men were 7 times more likely and that traveller women were 6 times more likely than the settled population to commit suicide. Since then, that's increased another 1 to 2% in the last decade, which is a horrific statistic. So we're now in and around the 8% times more likely for men and 7 times more likely for women. And that's coming in off the back of NITRIS, the National Traveller and Roma Inclusion Strategy. Last year, 11% of all traveller deaths were suicide related.
The suicide rates, are extreme. They're particularly catastrophic, particularly so for the young traveller men, because it's 6.5. So in essence, what that means for every one young, settled, sedentary young man between the ages of 15 to 32, 6.5 travellers, men of a similar age profile, die by suicide. It's extraordinary. It's catastrophic.
A lot of it have got to do with pride and not asking for help. That is one of the main problems we have, you know.
We would argue that identity and mental health and cultural identity and mental health are wrapped up in one. In the first initial weeks of the Irish Free State, you could argue that travellers became the first other. There's records from the urban district councils, from local authorities all over the country, backed up with landowners and so forth, calling for the removal of these bands of gypsies in fear that they may cause epidemics. And that continued right through the 1920s, right through the 30s, 40s and 50s. We now see from 61 and the publication of the Commission on Itinerancy in 1963, we see a centralised government deciding they were going to remove travellers from the Irish environment through an assimilation absorption policy. And there's no doubt with that attack on traveller identity, traveller culture, nomadism and a traveller way of life, we're living with the consequences of that today in the 21st century, with the huge rates, high rates of suicide, high rates of mental health, addiction, poly-addiction, mass unemployment. It's all there.
It's really worrying that there's still so many residual kind of negative effects and impacts on travellers in terms of their well-being and their mental health from the greater mainstream society.
Discrimination, it plays a big part in it, to be honest.
It affects a person by not being able to be themselves, sometimes trying to hide their identity, which they shouldn't have to, and being afraid. Really, that's what the discrimination does. And you're that much put down, that many times you feel it. And it's hard to get up and fight it, so it causes a lot of problems, depression, and a lot of people staying isolated and staying alone.
I'm a traveller myself, and in my days I've experienced a lot of discrimination. I feel sometimes that I go into shops that security is kind of too near to me and they're following me and they're watching me and they don't trust me. Now, go back a good few years ago, if that was done to me, and being honest with you, I would kind of get very angry and I kind of flip out about it. But now that I'm older, if I felt that I was followed around and I know that I'm doing nothing wrong, I would send for the manager of the shop and I'd explain my case. But being a traveller, I'd say nearly every day that you would get discriminated, you know what I mean? You feel that people don't trust you, they're trying to take you down to a little size. It is days then that it just wouldn't bother you, and but it of course it would hurt you.
It's a bit unfair, to be honest, because the name of a traveller is on us, or because we travel the world or something like that, or we do things from years ago or stuff like that, like travelling and staying in caravans or stuff like that. I don't think it's fair, to be honest, to be frowned on for being a traveller, but I don't let it get to me, like.
My daughter went down the village now, we were years in this village, and she went into the premises down the village just to go to the toilet. And he said that those toilets wasn't for our kind.
If your well-being as a person, if your kind of worth as a person has been chipped away at and chipped away at and chipped away at, through different systems your whole life, whether it be through education or through experiences within the healthcare system or greater experiences at large with the kind of state institutions, it can be very difficult to maintain a positive sense of self.
Trying to get to these services and things, I think if there's a bit of discrimination there, it just blacks them out totally. It turns the traveller person away from receiving any kind of help then, because they feel that they're being judged and they're being not accepted rightly, you know.
The Irish state, up until very recently, refused to acknowledge the ethnic identity of travellers, refused to acknowledge the historical nomadic element of travellers at a state level. Now, it's only happened in 2017 that they've finally acknowledged ethnicity. You can see from international research that when a people have been targeted consistently and with such venom from a dominant, the so-called dominant norm, that impacts both at a collective level within the community but at an individual level. And there's no doubt that when you have cultural erosion and cultural denial, that has a huge impact on your own self-esteem at a personal level.
But an awful lot needs to be done in terms of traveller mental health. It's an absolute crisis at the minute. It's a desperately sad situation. I think it's residual of how the state and the legal systems and the institutions have dealt with travellers over the years.
The state needs to say, we're going to work with you hand in hand and we're going to come up with a solution. So affirmative action programmes, reparations, recognition of the language, state recognition of the language. So therefore, if you have state recognition of the language, there needs to be investment in that. So to protect what's left and to promote and preserve all of that.
My view in terms of gender equality and its importance really in promoting positive health would be quite strong. I'd be a feminist. I wouldn't be afraid of that word. It would be all about supporting the women, enabling the women and empowering the community through that.
There's this image of travellers being this kind of anachronistic or backward, very macho society. And to some extent that is the case. There is an element of that.
I'd like women to speak up more for themselves and get out there looking for work. They're not just housewives, they have a life themselves. Just encourage them.
They have to do the cleaning, the cooking, take care of bills. It's a lot like.
I think the women do have a lot to deal with on their plate, to be honestly. I think that the women takes all the pressure. It takes too much pressure, to be honest.
It should be halfway even, like. But I have to say, my husband, he can be at times, he can be good help.
And my brother's was very good. And he didn't give a care what another travelling person had called them or what another travelling man had called them. They were very, very clean. They'd help their wives to brush up and wash up, and even if they had to go down to make tea.
Just communicate together, like, and do things together. It shouldn't have to be on one person. Both people should take a part.
I mean, it is changing, and it's important, and it's traveller women have been at the forefront in relation to traveller activism. I could name Nan Joyce, Chrissy Ward, others like that in the 70s and 80s who were at the forefront. They were the voices for the traveller movement long before men like myself or others came on board or were around to come on board. So yeah.
Of course, it's very important. I think equality for women to have a voice out there, to be heard. I think it is a big thing. And in the travel community, I think a lot of women are stepping forward, which is a good thing.
I have 6 kids of my own, 3 boys and 3 girls. I would not hold them back from school. What I missed out, and I'd like for them to have it. I have one daughter, she was ex for at the age of 15 years of age, and I said no way that I would have that. She should be at school at that age.
I'm 17 and a half years old and I'm a 6th year student. It's a great experience for being a traveller and staying in school for that long. Some travellers leave school after their confirmation to help at home with their parents. My experience of staying in school until I'm 17 and a half is brilliant. I would do it all over again and I really enjoy it. What are you doing at home, cleaning and stuff like that? You should stay in school, get your education and actually do things and go places.
I have cousins and friends gay, and I'm very happy to know that they're out there, and it was a big thing in our culture. Very hard thing to break through, maybe it's getting there.
Today, do you know what I mean, it's accepted if a person is born in that way, and if it happens, you're not going to disown your child for it. I wouldn't anyway. and it's everyone's business what they do. So that's the way I feel about it, being honest.
Over being a traveller, like I get along with everyone, like, you know, I don't frown people over being coloured or over being gay or something like that.
There's a huge amount of work to be done. I think there's a huge amount of education that has to take place. There's a stigma and taboo there. There's a silence, but we're getting there, and it's only through education and through sharing those kind of personal stories where we can remove the kind of stigma, the taboo, and challenge the discrimination in and around LGBTI traveller people.
Sometimes you can recognise the signs of a person having a mental health issue. I've been there myself through my husband, but when we go out as primary healthcare workers talking to travellers, I can tell them about my own husband's issue. Do you know what I mean? We can support them by talking to them.
Promote health issues to families, travellers' families. We'll be in office of a Tuesday, and a Wednesday and Thursday we do outreach.
We talk about mental health, we talk about heart, we talk about diabetes, and that is our role as a primary healthcare worker.
Things like getting medical cards, things like calling out and reading their appointments, because you do have to gain their trust. And I think it's our job to help them, to let them know about these services.
Try to get them out more, try them to interact with the community.
I would say, for instance, if there was a strong history of diabetes or cancer or whatever in the family, and that person thinks that, oh no, look, that appointment it's just an appointment. Well, we explain to them, don't go there, it's just not an appointment. You go to the appointment. And for kids today, it's very, very important for their eyes and their ears. And for instance, we had a good few cases of younger people in the travelling community have an eye problem. Now, we wouldn't be ashamed of that. I had a son that wore patches for 7 years, and I took him to every appointment that he had. I've two of my sons has ADHD, and you know what I mean, I've picked up on all of that.
Put a smile on someone's face by helping them in one of them little things. I think that's where we benefit from. They should even get more primary healthcare programs up and running. I think the Travellers is really, really benefiting from the teams like ourselves.
You can express yourself through art. You can express yourself, your feelings, and no one knows what you're doing, but you can express it. I think it releases a lot of stress from me and personally.
I find art very, very relaxing, and I find that it takes your mind off of everything. You know, you're just there, and you've this blank canvas as well when you're doing the physical art, and it just calms you down and just refixes you, if you know what I mean.
I feel the role of art in promoting positive health is so seriously underestimated. For me, it keeps me ticking over, it keeps my head right. You're in your own little zone, you're in your own little world, and it's not like you're making any mistakes. You're just taking time out for yourself.
I did get a bit of anxiety a couple of years ago myself, and I kind of went into, how would I put it, kind of a lonely kind of a state, and I suffered for about 12 months, and in the end I finally had to get help, but it was the best thing I ever did. I went to some counselling, something I thought I would never do being a traveller, you know. So I just found that was brilliant for me. And since then I have kind of mixed more in my community and in other communities, and I have kind of tried my best to be a little more healthier.
Well, I'm talking about an individual that lost her husband 2 years ago. And I just got talking to her, and I told her about a lot of things that I experienced myself. And now at the moment, thank God, we have a great communication, the two of us. And she's out now looking for work that she wouldn't do. She was at home, staying at home, isolated. And it's like, when you start all over again, it's like you feel sorry sometimes, and you feel you shouldn't be doing these things, but you have to live again. And you have to try to start your life.
The traveller community is really in crisis in terms of mental health, and we need some serious funding and some serious educated minds in behind it. And then we also need the bottom-up approach as well, that the traveller people be mobilised and supported to support themselves in the grassroots communities.
The state needs to accept and hold its hands up and say, yes, we did instigate an assimilationist policy from '63 onwards, and we created havoc within the traveller community. So I would say the state needs to do that. It needs to start saying, we got it wrong. Now we're going to try and fix, but we want to do it in partnership with the traveller community.
The only way to do it, I think, is to enable the primary healthcare teams and fund the primary healthcare teams to actually do the job, to build the trust, to get people uptaking the services, and to also, it needs to be a multifaceted approach then. On the other hand, is to actually fund the services. I mean, the infrastructure is there. We just need it funded so that we can get the work done or start chipping away.
I think it's groups like primary healthcare groups and traveller groups. I think we're the ones to make that change. There's good and bad in everyone, and I just think that this thing about travellers all being painted with the one brush, it's up to us to kind of show everyone isn't the same. There's good and bad in every community.
We're still human at the end of the day, like.
You know what I mean? Levels be black or white or Chinese, whatever colour we are, we're all human beings.
Positive mental health is extremely, extremely important. And I think the little steps you take towards that are the ones that help you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Patrick Nevin. I'm the manager of Tallaght Travellers Community Development Project. I would like to welcome everyone here this morning. We're going to have a discussion on mental health in the travel community as part of the Dublin Arts and Human Rights Festival 2020, hosted by Smashing Times International Centre for Arts and Equality. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Linda Green, the Primary Healthcare Coordinator of Kildare Travellers Action Group. And I would also like to welcome Bridget Dooley from Kildare Traveller Action Group as well. Maybe Linda, you could maybe give us a bit of an introduction to yourself and your position and role, and we'll move on from there.
Sure. Good morning, Patrick. Good morning, Bridget. Lovely to see you both. I'm delighted to be talking to you both about mental health in the traveller community this morning, in conjunction with Kildare Traveller Action and yourself, Patrick, in terms of Tallaght Travellers. And I suppose just to get started, it's like, who am I? I am the current primary healthcare coordinator with Kildare Traveller Action, and I run the primary healthcare programme in Kildare and in West Wicklow. I am a former national lead with the National Office for Social Inclusion for Traveller and Roma social inclusion. I've worked for 20 odd years in community development and the human rights field, looking closely at something called intersectionality. So when people experience different layers of discrimination or marginalisation or oppression as a people. And one of my areas of expertise in terms of human rights is working with the traveller community. I would have started out as a community development worker in the Kildare Travellers Development Group back in 2001. So I'm showing my age there, Patrick and Bridget.
You were around a while.
Not at all. You're not showing your age at all.
So for me, I see traveller mental health within the context of a human rights experience. So I'm hoping to get into more of that this morning and have a chat with the two of you, because as travellers, you guys are the premier experts in traveller mental health and in the traveller experience. And no academic could ever hope to qualify or quantify the experience of the travelling community or the travelling people in terms of discrimination and oppression. So I guess that's kind of a brief synopsis of my background, Patrick. I also worked as a lecturer in UCD in the School of Social Justice for over a decade and helped build the Women's Outreach Programme for marginalised women to access college courses in disadvantaged communities. And we work with lots of traveller programmes and Traveller women specific programs in an effort to try and support and enable and empower women in the travel community to access spaces of opportunity, I suppose, in education that would have previously been unopened to them, so the doors would have previously been closed, and we brought the outreach program into the local disadvantaged community. So I suppose that's kind of a little brief synopsis of my background and why I'm so interested and so passionate about traveller mental health.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you very much. And Bridget, maybe you could give us an outline of your background and your involvement in the travel movement and travel cause.
Yes, my name is Bridget Dooley, and I'm a primary healthcare worker with Kildare Traveller Action. There's 4 primary healthcare workers in total. We work for Kildare and West Wicklow. We usually be in our office in Newbridge of the Tuesday for our recording and our office work, and we're usually on outreach for Tuesday or for Wednesdays and Thursdays. And our outreach consists of calling to the traveller families, helping them with maybe some supports they need and some documentation they might need filled in, or helping them on anything that we can help them with, really. We also do our KPIs at the end of every month, and we are kind of on 3 topics, and that's mental health, diabetes, and healthy heart. The mental health in the traveller community really needs to be looked at and supported. So although we're supposed to take turns with diabetes one month, mental health the next month, and
Bridget, could I just come in there, because I have a number of questions and I don't want you to go off and give it all away now,
right.
Until we get there, because it's important that we capture this. So I know you're eager, and I totally agree with you. But just can I ask you, how long have you been involved with Kildare Travellers and the Primary Healthcare Project?
14 years. I moved to Kildare 14 years ago, and first of all, it wasn't Kildare primary healthcare. It was like it was KTA, all right, but it was like we were doing meetings and kind of different bits of jobs, you know. And then we trained for 3 years to become primary healthcare workers, and we're qualified now in around 4 years. And we did our 3 years training to become that.
So you've been involved directly in the Kildare Primary Healthcare Project and Kildare Traveller Action Group for the last 14 years.
14 years roughly, yeah.
That's a good old stretch, as to say. Anyways, look, I mean, we're amateurs at this, but in terms of this recording, but we get on with it. I have a couple of questions. Actually, I have 4 questions, and I'm going to throw them out, and maybe yourself or Linda or both of you can respond in whatever that is relevant, and we can have a bit of a discussion as we go along. Is that okay with everyone? Are we okay with that? Yeah?
That's
right. Okay, so the first question I'm just going to throw, and this can feed into both, and to yourself, Bridget, particularly what you're saying. How important are the primary healthcare workers in the traveller community?
Well, I think the primary healthcare workers are extremely important. Now, it's a little bit of hard work first when you're on about mental health and you go first to meet a family or you're introduced to them first, but as they gain your trust and find out exactly who you are and who you are working for, I think they open up a lot. And I think the supports that we can offer them at the moment and the link numbers and everything, I think they're very important to the travelling community. Not only through the COVID, but I think mental health is a very big issue in the travelling community. And I think a lot more travellers are opening up now, and they are taking the support that's out there for them. Not as many travellers are doing that as we'd like to, but they are more and more opening up now and looking for the supports and help. I think it is a major thing, and I think the primary healthcare workers, it's hard to gain trust with the families when you first get in contact with them, but over time, you do gain your trust with them, and they're more comfortable with speaking with you and taking these support numbers and anything we can offer.
Linda, would you have anything to add to that in terms of what Bridget has just said there? Is there a particular, I suppose, part of it that you might have a different take on?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Patrick. I think Bridget is selling herself and the team short in terms of the work that they do and the valuable trust that they've built up over the past decade or so in terms of being able to access the traveller community. They've an access that a settled person will never have and will never hope to have in terms of the trust that's been built up over the years within the work that the primary healthcare teams are doing, not only at Kildare Traveller Action, but on a national level. They bridge a gap, the primary healthcare programs and primary healthcare workers bridge a gap between the existing medical services on a holistic level and on a practical level in terms of the institution, whether that be from accessing GPs, to accessing medical card applications, to a whole array of support. And I think that it's nearly like a bridge of trust. I'd like to describe it nearly as a bridge of trust, because the primary healthcare teams are literally providing that bridge between the state and the institutions and then the travelling community. So many travellers, I think, would miss out on adequate healthcare provisions without the primary healthcare teams, because they may not even, with some of the older travellers in particular, they may not be able to read GP letters or the appointment letters that are coming in. And a simple thing that the primary healthcare team will do is it remind them of the appointments, talk to them about the appointments, let them know that they actually have an appointment. And through that basic kind of facilitation process, the primary healthcare workers are then enabling and empowering the local traveller community to access the different services that they may otherwise miss out on. So I think it's an incredibly valuable resource for the traveller community, and because it's traveller led and it's very empowering for the traveller people themselves, because they're taking back control of their own health, so to speak. So I hope that's okay to say, but
can I just, if I could just come in there, Linda, as well, and Bridget, I totally agree in terms of the point you're making there about underselling themselves, or Bridget underselling the role that they play within the community, but also that breaking that mistrust, that intergenerational mistrust from the foundation of the state to the present in relation to travellers, and how the state itself created that because of the exclusion and marginalisation. That's absolutely, I would wholeheartedly agree with that in terms of trying to bridge that gap you talk about. Bridging that gap, because that gap wasn't made by travellers, but it was created by the settled institutions and the state itself. So, yeah, absolutely. So I'll move on to the next question anyways, and we can see, can we get through these in a way that will garner more. What are the biggest issues facing traveller mental health today? And I'll leave it open.
I just go on, sorry, Bridget.
Sorry. I think travellers are, I think shame is the big thing. I think travellers kind of don't want to, they know they have the problem with mental health, they know they need support, but I think shame is a big thing. I think that the traveller community, I think they're ashamed to come out and say they have a problem with mental health. I think they're ashamed in a way of, oh, I'm going to need medication, I'm going to be put on what some people use as nerve tablets and stuff like that. I think it's all down to shame. I myself got anxiety a couple of years ago, and I got it pretty bad now. It was mostly towards driving. I got a thing into my head, I was afraid to drive. And it was mostly towards safety things. You know, I had to do everything, check everything and everything like that 100 times. And I denied that I needed help because I didn't want to be put on medication. Even when I went to the doctor in a very critical state, I still didn't want to accept the medication. I kept thinking in my head, oh, he's going to put me on medication. Everyone's going to find out that I have a problem. And although it was only anxiety and I got it all sorted, thank God. But I was thinking, people say, oh, she's mad. She's on medication for her nerves. We see her going into the counsellor. Do you know, all things like this. I think shame is one big thing. And I think the lack of education that they have to know about the mental health services out there could be another part of it, I think.
And if I could just add on to that as well, Bridget, first and foremost, you're very brave, and I think your story will really help lots of other traveller people. So thanks a million for sharing that. I hope that's okay to say to you. I think it's incredibly brave and poignant, and I think it's those kind of acts of bravery, or people speaking out and saying, "This is what happened to me. This is what was my experience," will help to remove the stigma and the shame, and help us to get healthy, productive conversations going. And I just want to add on, Patrick, I suppose it stems from your previous point. In terms of mental health, what we're talking about when we're talking about mental health is it's on a psychological level, it's on a social level, and it's on an emotional level. And I think for travellers, the residual impact of decades of basically poor policies and an illegitimization by the Irish state of the nomadic culture, and basically making traveller nomadism illegal via the Trespass Act and the different self-assimilation policies that have happened over the last 5-6 decades in the state before, since the 1920s, really, has a hugely negative residual impact on traveller health today. So when we're talking about social health, if you've been told your whole life that your culture is wrong, or that your culture has been demonized or pushed to the margins or oppressed or pushed to the side, that has a hugely consequential impact on your head, on your emotional health, on your life experience. And I think that's really coming to the fore now in terms of identity politics, as travellers trying to find their feet. And I know not all travellers are the same, and not all travellers are having these experiences. But I do think in terms of mental health that the traveller community is in a real crisis in terms of mental health, and that cannot be understated at the minute in terms of the suicide rate. When you have 11% of all deaths of traveller people are named as suicide-related deaths, that's a consequence of years and decades upon decades of oppression.
Absolutely.
And it's terrifying what's going on at the minute. We need some real structural, institutional, and social changes. But we need a revolution.
Totally agree, and I totally accept and agree with what Bridget was saying about that internalized shame, and we need to connect that internalized shame to those very policies you talk about, racist policies, and that's exactly. And we tend to look to 1960s Ireland or 1963 Ireland, particularly with the first, I suppose, real official engagement at a state level when they put pen to paper with the 1963 Commission on Itinerancy and literally laid bare what they had intended or what they were intending to do for the following decades in terms of that document, assimilation and the absorption policies that were to flow from that. Even as early as 1922, and I've written a few bits on this myself and discussed it, as early as 1922 on the foundation of the state, in the initial weeks, months of, and this was prior to even civil war happening in Ireland when they descended on each other, there was a huge outcry across the state at a local and council and regional and at central level as well. They called for the removal of thinkers. So it's just interesting because in recent weeks and months with COVID, I won't go on too much about this because I'm the one asking the questions, but there's been a discussion about the social contract, what that social contract and what do we intend to do and how it grew and all of this mystical kind of almost throwback to we were a great people. But in actual fact, the social contract never included travellers. And the definition of a social contract, you must be invited in. We were never invited in. So the very points you're raising and the very points that Bridget raised about that internalized fear and shame of mental health, because think about it, we had incarceration centres in this country, particularly for people that did display mental health issues. So travellers in their own way created a kind of a protected bubble, if you think about it, by internalizing all of that and protecting themselves because they had reasons to do so. So I think you're absolutely right. can be no moving forward until there is an in-depth discourse, a paradigm shift in relation to the state policies and how we're living with the results of that today. So yeah, totally agree, and absolutely. So we'll move on to the next question, and hopefully we'll get something else out of that. What needs to be done? I suppose we've answered some of it, but we need more of it from yourself, Bridget and Linda. What needs to be done to address these issues that we've just discussed and talked about? So what needs to be done?
I think that it's part of the work of our primary healthcare workers when we're out and about, out on outreach, to give as much information as we can out to them. Try to let them know that it's okay to go and seek help. And if you have a couple of real life stories, it's a good way to kind of make them confide in you and make them kind of say, well, she got over it. She did what she had to do. And nobody, the whole world don't need to know where you're going, who you're going to meet, what medication you're on. You know, things like that, because the medication don't always last a lifetime. You know what I mean? The doctor told me one time a great line, and I'll never forget it. I refused the medication 2 or 3 times, and when I was in so bad one morning, he said, Bridget, it's just like if you broke your leg. He said, you're down here. You need a crutch just to help you up that level, up to the level of normality again. You know what I mean? Like you need a crutch to help you up. So sometimes you just need a little bit of medication to help you up. And then once you're up on your own level, you can control things yourself. So I think we need to give and leave the information there. When you're gone, they might pick up the leaflet, they might think of what you said in their own time, and they might look for the support and help they need. So I think the more information we can get out and the more contact details and the more real life stories that we can tell out about it. We could be gone 2 days, but they could think themselves, oh, maybe it's not that bad. Look, I'll just start off to get a bit of help. So I think it's the more information we can give these people and let them know it's all right to need help. That's my point of view.
And just on that, Bridget, before Linda comes in there, I would wholeheartedly agree with you. I would also say primary healthcare projects across the region and nationally, more support, more supports to support the primary healthcare projects, funding and so forth. So I think you're right, because of all of that work and that fabulous work that's been done at a community level by yourselves and others here in Tallaght and across the country as well. More resources and support coming from a state level. Anyways, Linda.
Yeah, I think I'd just echo exactly what Bridget and yourself, Patrick, were saying. So I suppose just fund the projects and fund them appropriately and adequately.
Absolutely.
Not willy-nilly piecemeal bits of funding, but appropriate, structured, tiered support, and also to help them mobilise Traveller people from the grassroots up, so that Traveller people can take ownership of this. So it needs to be Traveller-led, Traveller-centred, and Traveller-specific. Another key instrument that needs to be put in place on a policy level, on a national level, is to get the ethnic identifiers into the national operational plans. Get them in. What's the delay? I don't understand. I wrote it into the national operational plan for the National Office of Social Inclusion over 2.5 years ago, and it still hasn't been fully implemented. I mean, the sortie actions off the back of literacy, the legislation, the policy work, the research, it's there. Implement the action.
Yes.
Like, stop putting the brakes on and let the change, let the transformative politics, let it take place. Yeah. And let the Traveller people mobilise from the grassroots up and what community development, Patrick. You know yourself.
Yeah. Agree. And what you're talking about there is a value system.
Yes.
A value system that has never been applied to Tinker Travellers or to travellers from the formation of the state. No. And I absolutely, you talk about the ethnic question, you talk about, it's all well and good to have attitudes and statements of inclusivity and we're all in this together. If the resources and the supports are not put in place, and that value system that was placed on the back of the settled sedentary population from the get-go, we as travellers and our organisations and our primary healthcare projects and people like yourself and others that are allies in that, we will see the same kind of issues arising in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So that value system needs to be extended and it needs to be acknowledged. And state ownership, Linda and Bridget, of traveller identity, because we're now, as you said earlier on, talking about identity and identity politics. We are in the heart of it. And if we want to stem the rise of fascism and racism, we need to support those organizations and those projects like the primary healthcare to counter that, because part of what's happening to travellers and has happened is of a direct result of that racism and discrimination and marginalization and the othering process that took place. So absolutely. And I think the more we get of that in, the better as well. So we're now down to the final question. What role do you think the arts and creative expression have in promoting positive mental health?
Bridget, are you okay for me to go first in this one?
Yeah.
I can see you nodding. I think in terms of the art and in terms of our collaboration with Smash and Time, we did collaboration with Smash and Times last year, and it was wonderful for the staff to learn coping mechanisms for stress to promote their own positive mental health, because the stress that they're sometimes under as inadequately funded primary healthcare workers is huge. And to have a fun, playful, innovative, creative workshop with Smash and Times that didn't require literacy for the workers was fantastic, because it meant that the whole primary healthcare team could participate fully. And I think art therapy as a complementary therapy along with other therapies can be really supportive and really empowering and enabling for people. And it might sound kind of aloof and out there, but it might be something as simple as sitting down and giving yourself the headspace to do a jigsaw, to draw with the kids, to write out your story, to tell your folklore, to share your experiences via creative writing or via painting. And it can be so therapeutic, because if as a people you've been silent, art can give you a voice, and art can be a vehicle to allow the screams that are historically silent be finally heard, and be heard in a way that everyone can understand. So I think it's a really undervalued resource, and you don't need loads of money. You can do it with a pen and paper, you can do it with crayon, and it's never wrong because it's coming from you. And it doesn't need to be judged by any outside world. You're not answering to any art critic. It's just a small little thing for yourself, like a gift that you give to yourself, to draw, paint, to write, to share your story. And it can be a wonderfully empowering experience.
Yeah, I think you said it all there, Linda. I think, you fitted it all in. Doing this bit of artwork and things, you wouldn't believe. Like when we did those sessions with Smash and Times down in our building in Newbridge, you'd be so nervous first because you didn't know what was going to happen or what, but the things that we got out of it, like the relaxation, the laugh, the crack, and just in all, it showed us how things can be done differently. Do you know what I mean? I found it very, very good anyway. And it takes away your nervous because, as you said, nobody is right and wrong. It's up to everybody. And I really, really enjoyed my sessions anyway because I found it very relaxing and stuff. But it puts you thinking, like what you said. Sometimes all you need is a bit of a crayon and a paper just to take a few minutes time out. You know, it doesn't have to be all this what we thought it was. You know, I just it put you thinking. In other words, like, and I really enjoyed my time with the Smash and Times because the part I enjoyed most, there was no right and wrong. Do you know? So I enjoyed it.
I've just realized something, that I'm not a very good moderator or whatever, because I agree with everything you've just said. I've agreed with all of your previous stuff. So I don't know how objective I am in this. I am not at all. Absolutely, I agree with everything. I do think you're doing a fantastic job, the primary healthcare projects, they're essential, and we need them resourced, and we need them supported, and we need them acknowledged and valued for what they are doing, because they're filling that gap you spoke about, Linda, for the state, for the institutions of the state. So they need to have that resources and valued, and they need to be really valued, accepted. That's the fact of it.
Yeah.
So I'd like to bring this to an end and say thank you very much. I do hope
you all very much.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both.